The ceremony was just minutes away. Jalen, one of America's youngest tech billionaires, stood in silence outside the suite, heart pounding, hands shaking. He thought he was about to marry the love of his life. Alicia, elegant, powerful, the woman who once graced magazine covers, but now devoted her life to charity work. She was everything he ever wanted. And Reverend Thomas, his father, his role model, his spiritual hero, was set to officiate the ceremony. But when Jalen pushed open that door, everything shattered. There, on her knees in her designer wedding gown, was Alicia, and the man she was with wasn't a stranger. It wasn't an ex. It wasn't a guest. It was his own father. Reverend Thomas, the man who baptized him, raised him, prayed over him, was the one defiling his bride just moments before he was supposed to bless their union. Jalen didn't scream. He didn't break anything. He simply watched, turned around, and walked away. What he did next shook the entire island, and no one saw it coming. Before we go deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Jalen wasn't born into wealth. He earned every dollar from grit and long nights, the kind of man who coded in motel rooms, slept on couches, and pitched ideas in borrowed suits. By 35, he'd become one of the youngest black tech billionaires in America. A self-made empire built from an app he designed while working security at night and teaching himself Python by day. But even with all that money, all that power, he stayed humble. Still said, "Yes, ma'am," to strangers. Still wore the same watch his late mother gave him when he turned 18. The only thing flashier than his bank account was Alicia. Alicia was the kind of woman you don't forget. Model turned philanthropist. She spoke 4 languages, traveled to over 40 countries, and once built a clean water foundation for a remote village in Ghana. But behind her perfect smile was a past she rarely spoke of. A few whispers from old friends, a tabloid story here and there. She always brushed them off with a wink and said, "Some things are better left unsaid." Jalen's father, Reverend Thomas, was a legend in his own right. A man who filled stadiums with sermons, baptized celebrities, and led one of the largest churches in the South. Old school, sharp-tongued, deep-pocketed, and deeply respected. When Reverend Thomas walked into a room, even billionaires stood up. Their wedding was set on a private Caribbean island. Helicopters flew in elite guests. Diamond chandeliers hung from palm trees. Custom champagne bottles were etched with their initials. Everything looked like a dream, beautiful, expensive, and flawless. But dreams have cracks. And beneath the diamonds and silk were secrets no one was ready to face. Not yet. From the moment Jalen laid eyes on Alicia at a Silicon Valley fundraiser, something clicked. She wasn't like the other women he'd met in that world. There was a softness to her, a confidence that didn't beg for attention. They talked for hours that night, about travel, purpose, legacy. 2 weeks later, he flew her to Paris. A month later, he introduced her to his board. And 6 months after that, he proposed on a yacht off the Amalfi Coast. The video of that moment, him down on one knee, Alicia gasping with her hands over her face, racked up over 8 million views in 3 days. News outlets called it the modern fairy tale, a billionaire who stayed humble, a former model turned humanitarian. They were goals, but what no one saw was the part that didn't make it into the photos. Alicia was stunning, composed, supportive. She stood by Jalen during IPO meetings, fundraisers, keynote speeches, always smiling, always flawless. But there was something else too, something quieter. Reverend Thomas, Jalen's father, started to appear, more than necessary. At first it seemed innocent, a warm compliment here, a long conversation after Sunday brunch. But soon, Alicia's laughter at his jokes lasted just a bit too long. Her hand would brush his arm in ways that didn't feel entirely accidental. Once she told him, "If I'd met you before your son, I might have had a different last name." Thomas laughed, said nothing, but his eyes didn't look away. Jalen never noticed, or maybe he didn't want to. He was in love with his whole heart. He believed in Alicia. He believed in family. So when Alicia asked if Thomas could bless the wedding himself, "It would mean everything to me," she said. Jalen didn't hesitate. He said yes, but Jalen didn't know what they had already shared behind closed doors. As the wedding drew closer, something shifted. Thomas, once a supportive figure, began inserting himself into every decision: the seating chart, the music, even the flavor of the cake. He'd call Jalen at odd hours with concerns, never quite naming them. "Just take your time," he'd say. "Don't rush into something just because the world's watching." When Jalen pressed him, asking what exactly he meant, Thomas would dodge the question. "A man knows when something's off," he muttered once. "You'll see." But when Jalen asked if it was about Alicia, Thomas only said, "I didn't say that," and changed the subject. Then there was the moment Jalen would never forget. He came home early from a meeting. Alicia and Thomas were in the living room. Alicia was adjusting the strap of her dress, and Thomas was standing far too close. No one spoke when Jalen walked in. Just silence. A few seconds of eye contact, and then Alicia laughed, called it nothing, and walked away. Still, the whispers had started. One of the bridesmaids told Jalen's cousin, "They act more like old lovers than in-laws." Another guest joked, "If I didn't know any better, I'd think the Reverend was the groom." Alicia became distant in those final days. Her phone was always face down. She skipped a final menu tasting. When Jalen asked if something was wrong, she smiled, kissed him lightly, and said, "I'm just overwhelmed. That's all." He believed her. He wanted to believe her, because he loved her, deeply. And when a man's that far in, he doesn't always want the truth. But the night before the wedding, Jalen decided to do something spontaneous. He picked up her favorite flowers, left the rehearsal dinner early, and took a private path to her suite. He knocked once, then opened the door. What he saw would rewrite everything he thought he knew about love and loyalty. The hallway was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your footsteps sound louder than they should. Jalen held a small velvet box in his hand. Inside, a custom wedding band Alicia had once admired in a boutique window in London. He smiled to himself as he walked toward her suite. The plan was simple: surprise her with the ring, kiss her goodnight, and wake up tomorrow as husband and wife. But when he reached her door, it was slightly ajar. He hesitated, heard muffled voices, a low laugh, familiar. Then Alicia's voice, soft and playful. He pushed the door open just an inch, and that's when time stopped. Inside, Alicia knelt in her lingerie, and in front of her stood his father, Reverend Thomas, shirt unbuttoned, hands on her face. Jalen didn't gasp. He didn't barge in or scream or throw the flowers to the floor. He simply stood there, watching, silent. And then he dropped the ring box. It hit the tile with a dull, hollow sound, but no one inside heard it. He stepped back, gently pulled the door shut, and walked away. No confrontation, no questions, no shouting match or slammed doors, just silence. Cold, burning silence. He didn't need answers. He'd already seen enough. Because this wasn't just betrayal. He wasn't just cheated on. He was humiliated by the woman he loved and the man who raised him. The sun was at its highest point, casting golden light across the white sand aisle. Rows of hand-picked orchids lined the seats. A grand piano played softly in the background. Guests, senators, CEOs, celebrities, were already seated, fanning themselves gently in the Caribbean heat. The atmosphere was breathtaking, poised, perfect. Alicia appeared at the edge of the aisle in a custom pearl-beaded gown that shimmered with every step. She looked calm, composed, like the night before had never happened. She held her bouquet tightly, smiled for the cameras, and began to walk. But as she reached the altar, there was no Jalen, no Groom. The officiant stood confused. The pianist hesitated, then continued playing. A few guests whispered, assuming there was a small delay. A wardrobe issue, maybe. A last-minute touch-up. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 15. The whispers turned to murmurs. Heads turned. Phones buzzed quietly in laps. Alicia stood alone, still smiling, but her fingers now gripped the bouquet so tightly her knuckles turned white. The man she was supposed to marry had vanished, and no one knew where he was. No note, no call, no explanation. Only one question burned through every guest's mind: where was Jalen, and what was he planning? Just when the whispers were growing into panic, he returned. Jalen walked down the aisle, not in his wedding tux, but in a tailored black suit. No boutonniere, no smile. His face was unreadable. Some guests stood in confusion, others simply watched, frozen. He stepped up to the altar and took the microphone from the stunned officiant. Alicia, still standing there in her bridal gown, tried to speak, but Jalen raised a hand. She went quiet. He turned to the guests. "I want to thank everyone who traveled from around the world to be here," he said calmly. "You came to witness love, to celebrate truth, so that's exactly what I'm going to give you." He looked toward the screen set up behind them, originally meant for wedding photos and a slideshow of memories. But instead it flickered to life with security footage from the night before. Jalen didn't speak. He didn't need to. The video showed Alicia in her lingerie, and Thomas, his father. The room erupted, gasps, screams. Someone dropped their glass. A woman fainted. Reverend Thomas, once praised and revered, collapsed into a chair, drenched in sweat, unable to speak. Alicia stepped back, trembling. Then she turned, heels scraping against marble, and bolted down the aisle, veil flying behind her like a ghost. Jalen stood there watching it all, silent once again. The wedding was canceled, the guests dispersed. The family name, once respected, honored, was now buried in shame. But Jalen wasn't finished yet. Jalen didn't scream. He didn't go on interviews. He didn't trash hotel rooms or post cryptic messages. His silence was louder than rage. His strategy, colder than revenge. 2 days after the wedding that never was, Jalen quietly uploaded a 5-minute clip to his personal website. No dramatic music, no commentary. Just a grainy, time-stamped video titled, "My Bride and My Father." The footage showed Alicia, unclothed and laughing, in the arms of Reverend Thomas. It was the exact moment he had witnessed with his own eyes. Unedited, undeniable. Within hours it spread like wildfire. First in group chats, then Twitter, then blogs, then mainstream news. The internet did what it always does. It dissected every frame, every second, every sound. Memes were created. Threads went viral. Alicia's fan pages turned into battlegrounds. Her brand partners panicked. By the end of the day, her face was removed from beauty campaigns. Fashion brands issued public statements cutting ties. Her agents stopped taking calls. The woman who once represented elegance, poise, and power was reduced to a scandal headline and a trending topic. But that wasn't the end. Jalen didn't just stop at exposure. He went deeper. He knew the one thing his father valued more than his image was his empire. Reverend Thomas had spent decades building a religious dynasty. Millions in offerings, book deals, corporate endorsements, even political influence. And in just a few carefully planned steps, Jalen dismantled it all. He filed a legal motion to remove Thomas from the board of trustees at the family-run church, submitted the footage, along with a detailed statement of misconduct. The church's lawyers had no choice. Within 72 hours, Thomas was permanently removed from leadership. Then came the will. Jalen rewrote it entirely. The inheritance that was meant to be passed down to Thomas, including properties, investments, and retirement accounts, was legally reassigned. And where did the money go? To a women's shelter. But not just any shelter. It was one Alicia had once promoted in her public charity efforts. That same shelter, now fully funded under Jalen's name, opened a new wing. The plaque outside read, "For every woman manipulated, silenced, or shamed, may you find safety here." And still, Jalen wasn't done. There were rumors that a second video existed, more explicit, more personal, one that Alicia had sent to Thomas before the affair began. It was never released, never posted. But attorneys close to the case confirmed it was used in closed-door negotiations to ensure Alicia couldn't sue for defamation. No lawsuit was ever filed, no charges ever pressed. Alicia had no choice but to walk away. And Jalen? He didn't gloat. He didn't write a book or appear on podcasts or cash in on his pain. He simply disappeared from public view. He walked away clean. Because some men take revenge with fire and fists. Jalen did it with silence and strategy. After the fallout, Alicia disappeared. Entirely. No statement, no apology, no final interview. She just vanished. One day she was a symbol of grace and aspiration, on the covers of magazines, smiling on charity gala stages, front row at fashion weeks. The next day, she was gone, completely. Her social media accounts were deleted, verified checkmarks wiped clean. Brand campaigns pulled her image within hours. One luxury skincare line even airbrushed her out of a commercial mid-air during a network broadcast. Sponsors dropped her like a live grenade. Friends distanced themselves. Publicists refused to comment. Her name, once synonymous with elegance and influence, became something people whispered about, only when they were sure no cameras were rolling. Some say she fled the country, Europe maybe, or Southeast Asia. Others believe she checked herself into a high-end wellness clinic, hoping to vanish beneath the radar. There were no sightings, no paparazzi photos, no grainy videos of her at an airport or hiding behind sunglasses. Nothing. Just silence and shame. As for Reverend Thomas, the fall was even harder. Once a towering figure in the religious world, respected by politicians, celebrities, and CEOs, he was now a ghost of his former self. After being removed from the church board, several high-ranking clergy publicly condemned him. Donations to the ministry plummeted. His weekly broadcasts were canceled. Affiliates dropped his sermons from their networks. And in a twist that echoed through every corner of his empire, parishioners started walking out of his church. What remained was a man in exile, not in prison, but in isolation. He now lives in a small, guarded property on the outskirts of Savannah, Georgia. No sermons, no audiences, no applause, only silence and the weight of a name that once meant something. And Jalen? He never said another word about the scandal, not in interviews, not in public appearances, not even when offered millions for an exclusive tell-all. He declined every offer. He continued running his company, but stepped away from the spotlight. He turned down Forbes profiles, magazine features, keynote speeches. He stopped attending galas and award ceremonies. No more vacations caught by paparazzi. No new relationships splashed across blogs. Nothing. People called him strong, a hero, a man of dignity and control, a symbol of how to handle betrayal with class. But those closest to him knew he wasn't the same. He smiled, yes. He worked, yes. But the light in his eyes had dimmed. He never publicly dated again, never introduced anyone new. At events, he was always alone, polite, composed, but distant. Because no matter how much applause you get from the world, it can't fill the quiet that betrayal leaves behind. Jalen had won. He had exposed them. He had protected his name. But in doing so, he had also buried a piece of himself, the part that once believed in forever, the part that trusted, the part that loved without caution. And that was the true consequence. Not the loss of a wedding, not the humiliation, but the quiet, aching realization that even the most beautiful things can lie. In the end, betrayal didn't come from enemies, not from business rivals, not from jealous exes, not even from strangers in the shadows. It came from the two people Jalen would have laid down his life for, his bride and his father. Two people who were supposed to love him unconditionally, one who raised him, the other who promised to stand beside him, and yet, together, they tore his heart from his chest and danced on the altar of his trust. The wedding that was meant to unite two families in joy became the very moment that split one apart in shame. And what was supposed to be the happiest day of his life turned into a chapter he would spend years trying to forget. The flowers wilted, the guests vanished, the vows were never spoken, and at the end of it all, an empty chapel remained. Imagine that. The aisle decorated in white petals, untouched, chairs still lined in rows like silent witnesses to a crime. The altar, once glowing with hope, now dim, abandoned. The air, thick with a memory no one wanted to speak of. And Jalen? He didn't rage, he didn't scream. He simply walked away, leaving behind a legacy of restraint, pain, and quiet power. But the scars, they stayed. Because you don't just move on from this, you don't just forget the moment your entire world turned upside down by the hands of the very people who were supposed to protect it. And the lesson? It's simple. Trust is a fragile thing. It isn't shattered by enemies, it's demolished by those who hold the key to your heart. In the aftermath, the world called Jalen a hero, a man who faced betrayal with grace, who took back control, who didn't let the pain consume him. But inside, he was a man who had to relearn everything, how to trust, how to love, how to exist, without letting bitterness build a home inside him. And here's the truth no one tells you. Revenge doesn't always feel like justice. Sometimes it just feels like survival. Cold, lonely, empty. Because while the world claps for your comeback, you're still standing in the ruins of what should have been. So now, we ask you, what would you have done in Jalen's shoes? Would you have gone further? Would you have exposed them, or walked away? Do you think he did the right thing? Or should he have burned every bridge and name involved? Let us know in the comments. We want to hear your story. Because betrayal isn't just a headline, it's real, and it happens more often than we want to admit. If this story hit you hard, if it reminded you of something you've lived through, if it made you feel seen, understood, or simply shocked, then don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. Your support helps us bring stories like this to light, true, raw, and unforgettable. And join us next week for another tale you won't believe. Because sometimes the truth is more twisted than fiction.